Welcome, welcome everybody to the National Civil War Naval Museum here in Columbus, Georgia. I'm Gary Edelman. We got Chris White behind the camera, and we're going to meet some of the staff as we go around this super cool facility covering, well, let me ask Holly. She runs the place. What do y'all do here?
Hey, my goodness, we do so much. We do educational programs. We talk to many school children. We talk to people from all over the world. We take care of some of the most unique naval artifacts you'll find anywhere. In fact, we are the only museum in the country that tells the stories of both sides of the American Civil War as relates to the navies.
Good. Well, we can't wait to check it out. I think you've given us some of your staff to take us around.
Yes, I sure have.
All right, good. Let's get to it. All right, here we are in one of the galleries. Logan is going to take us around here. What are we seeing here?
Yeah, so here we're seeing the remains of the CSS Jackson. It was a ironclad ram built right here in Columbus, Georgia, at the Columbus Naval Iron Works and Confederate Navy Yard. It was in production for 2 years, beginning in 1863 and right up until the very end of the war. Unfortunately for the producers of the ironclad, they never actually saw battle until it was captured by Wilson's cavalry, making his way through Alabama and then across right here into Columbus, Georgia. On April 16th, 1865, Wilson's cavalry didn't have much to do with a big ironclad, so they actually set it ablaze and sent it down the Chattahoochee River.
And what we're looking at here is, of course, a later made sort of frame of the top that did burn, and we're seeing the whole base.
Exactly. So we see kind of a ghost image of the casemate, but we do have on display here in what was underneath the waterline, the lumber, that actually survived that burning. So this sat at the bottom of the Chattahoochee River for about 100 years until it was recovered in the early 1960s.
Wow. Well, let's walk down if we can.
Sure.
Can we go down?
Of course.
And we're going this way, of course. So now when people, I think a lot of our people are real good on the Civil War.
Right.
But they're not so good on the Civil War Navy. So first of all, is this a large ironclad ship? Is this typical? Does it have a class name? What is this?
So this would have been, so the Confederate Navy was always experimenting, kind of trying to play catch up with the U.S. Navy. So unlike the U.S. Navy that really had class systems, this was very much kind of an experimentation by the producers of the Jackson. It started off attempting to be a center paddle wheel. They quickly realized that would not work, and they overhauled it again. So it went from being almost what they would call like a barn-like construction of the casemate, complete overhaul, and then switching to steam-powered with the screw system, which we'll see to the this end of our gallery, rather than that paddle wheel system as originally designed.
But let me ask you then, to get an idea, I mean, is this 10 sailors? Is this 400 sailors? How many sailors are on this, something like this?
There would have been up to 200 to 300 crew members on the Jackson.
Wow. And they lived down here, of course, if they were going to be out on patrol and everything like that. That's
right. They would have been all on board if it was out on patrol. But also the Jackson, if it's stationed here in Columbus, sailors may have been through the town as well.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I saw some of the anchor chains here. I like that you have some of the original iron. You're seeing some of it right here. Really neat stuff.
Right. Yeah. And so this, this really represents the technological achievement of the progress of the time. A little bit of trial and error, comes with that achievement. There were some successes and failures, but yes, you do see the lumber as well as a lot of the iron plating that we have on display here from the original casemate of the Jackson, as well as maybe most impressively the screws.
So man, we'll go check those out, but I have so many questions. But first, Holly said that you guys do a lot of education, you get a lot of school groups, so there's no way I'm the first one to ask this. I'm sure the 8th graders want to know, what do these guys do about the bathroom? I mean, is this a bucket overboard situation, or is it something else?
So it actually very much would have been basically a bucket overboard situation. So as maybe primitive as that sounds, and as perhaps maybe gross for some visitors to hear, men of that time period, you know, you could basically have to make do with your bodily functions.
Excuse the pun there. Well done. You know, when kids are here, I'm sure they're tempted to touch it and climb on it and everything like that. But what do they like to do most in this gallery here?
They are really impressed with just the scale of the entire ship, and then when we come here and get a good look at the screws that were powering the back of the ship, they really start to make the connections of how this functioned as really a large piece of machinery.
And you're talking about, I mean, this is a huge vessel, and then it's got cannons on there, and then
Right.
it's got boilers and all this more metal, and then you've got hundreds of sailors, and then all they need to do it, you need everything, all the ordnance to fight and whatnot. It's really impressive, and this is a specimen like I've never seen before. And I also understand, and we're going to do a separate video showing some of the stuff that is both in your collection and some of the things that came up when they excavated this ship. But I understand there's a lot of it, and I understand that a lot of it you don't know what it is.
Right, yeah. So from that process of recovery from the Chattahoochee in the early 1960s, a lot of pieces were recovered, and honestly, we're still having families come to us, you know, saying, "Oh, my father was involved in the recovery process," and there was just countless amount of people involved in that recovery in the 1960s, and we regularly have donations of new pieces to go along with the multitude of items we have from that original recovery process.
Good, and I've seen that some of it is, you know, melted because the ship burned, and some of it is so nondescript as to be completely unhelpful.
Right, yeah, so it's really becomes a challenge to really break down which each piece of iron or other materials we're looking at. Some pieces more interesting than others in terms of very much revealing themselves. Some places seemingly out of place being on board a ship, but that's all adds to the fun of the mystery of really doing the research on our items.
Cool, and there's a lot of cool things in the collection that do not have to do with the Jackson or the other things here. Two things. One, the Chattahoochee, in this case, because we're here, is both a river and a vessel. So remember, it's the main river here at Columbus, but there's also going to be a vessel by that name we're about to see. And two, make sure you share this with your friends. Click that subscribe and like button, you know, and make sure you come here. We're at the National Civil War Naval Museum in Columbus, Georgia. Super cool, and we've only been to one room. Let's keep moving.
Yeah, so next we'll see the Chattahoochee, which, as you just mentioned, named after its namesake river. It was originally built in Saffold, Georgia. That's about 30 miles or so south of Columbus here. And now it did have somewhat of a tragic history. In 1863, down in Florida, the Chattahoochee did have a boiler explosion, which actually cost the lives of about 19 sailors on board the crew at that time. But we're actually seeing the second iteration of the remains of the Chattahoochee, if you will. So the ship was actually recovered in Florida, brought here to Columbus, to the Columbus Naval Iron Works, where it was being re-outfitted with new engines from the ironworks here in production, and so it was actually going to be intended to join the Jackson as kind of a mini fleet here patrolling the Chattahoochee River, and the Chattahoochee as a ship then was scuttled right before that Battle of Columbus, so that it would not be captured by Wilson's cavalry.
Okay, and what are we looking at here? Like the front third of the ship? I can't quite tell.
So it's actually about the back third of the ship.
This is the back third. Okay.
Yeah,
You'll see what an expert I am on the Civil War navies.
Yeah, so we'll actually get a look of one of the screws, just like the Jackson, just slightly smaller scale, as well as here on the left. We have the piston steam engines.
Nice, okay. Well, it would have been helpful for me to have seen this side first before I made my assumption. So very cool, and you see substantial. So you're only seeing a small portion of that ship, and these are, of course, not the boilers. Or are these boilers?
These aren't the boilers. These are actually the pistons that would have driven the screws here. So there would have been two screws, and it's a very similar to what have been on the Jackson as well. So slightly smaller scale, but very similar machinery as the Jackson. Both of the machinery for the Chattahoochee as well as the Jackson produced right here in Columbus at the Naval Iron Works.
Super cool. Let's back up a little bit this way. I mean, you're seeing 1860s technology right in front of you here, and I'll bet you for my money, I bet you some of y'all are going to think that this looks a little bit more advanced than they otherwise would have expected.
Right, yeah. So the technology, once again, always impressive when you're looking at that Civil War machinery, the heavy machinery that you might not expect if you're not as familiar with the naval stories of the war.
Good. Now, just a quick educational moment, because again, a lot of our people are infantry, ground-based people, artillery people, cavalry people. But here you start getting into the navies and you start hearing different terms, and one of those is brown water navy. What's going on here?
So you might have some expectations of almost like these romantic images of battles out in the middle of the ocean, but largely the Civil War story of the navies is on those river systems, especially as the Confederate Navy is moving their naval yards inland to try to avoid the Anaconda plan of the blockade of the United States Navy. So the brown water Navy, you see a whole lot more innovation, technological changes of those ironclads that are also trying to have very shallow drafts to be able to maneuver through those river systems. Famously, the Chattahoochee River, but also, of course, places like the Mississippi.
Absolutely, and anybody who's been to them knows that they are not as clear as the ocean.
Right.
You see a lot more mud and silt and whatnot.
Yeah.
I think we're only going to reference this, but in a couple of seconds, what's up with the torpedoes here?
So when you think of, in modern days terminology, torpedoes, you're thinking of a projectile system. This is much more primitive Civil War era technology. We see some variances of different torpedoes, but think about them more during the Civil War period as almost being more like what we would consider to be mines today.
Yes.
So it would require
Percussion.
percussion and direct contact of a ship hitting one of these torpedoes rather than the torpedo being projected towards the vessels.
I see it. Cool. And I would say that, people, young and old, men and women, sometimes like to learn about things that go bang.
Right, yeah,
so
exactly.
I think it's great that you have this here. Now, before we split up and you turn us all over to somebody else, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think that basically covers what I can think of.
Okay, good. Well, thanks for joining us, Logan. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're going to check out more of the National Civil War Naval Museum here in Columbus, Georgia. Let's go, Chris. All right, we have so much more to see, and now we're here with Brandon. They have swapped around. How you doing?
Good, sir.
All right, man. What do we got going on here?
So this is our main gallery. Here we have our timeline. It takes you month by month, year by year through the war. Some of those better and lesser known naval battles. But what we really like to point out on this side of the museum is our flag collection. This is one of the largest flag collections, naval related flags you're going to see anywhere.
Wow.
And these are all authentic Civil War flags, both Union and Confederate.
Really impressive. Are any of them ones from vessels people might have heard of?
On down here, just past, of course, Catesby Jones's uniform code.
Catesby Jones, remember the name. Catesby Jones, AP Catesby Jones.
Right. Is our flag from the Atlanta. The Atlanta, of course, was captured by the United States Navy just off the coast of Savannah and went from being a Confederate state ship to a Union ship. This one actually came off of the Atlanta here, and this is the largest flag we have displayed at the museum.
And there's no way around it. You can't get this across without seeing the real thing.
That's true.
To really get the size across of how impressive this is. Oh, and it's just a remarkable shape as well.
Of course, we have it represented on the model here, so it's striking to see the ship with the flag on the model, and then wow.
And now the flag looks tiny.
Right.
Now, I want to note that while we're walking by here, I'm seeing cutlasses and artifacts and uniforms. We're going to do a separate video where we're going to cover some of this stuff. So don't feel cheated, because I love talking about uniforms and other things like that. So we'll probably grab Chris White from behind the camera and have him do some of this stuff.
Yeah, and articles of clothing from John T. Luck of Battery Wagner fame.
He's a surgeon, right?
Yes, surgery.
You said, and I think you told me that you can see some blood stains on his vest.
Yeah, that's kind of gruesome, but surgery, surgeons were quite common on naval ships, of course, amputations, and yeah.
Very cool. I got to go do my thing here. Nope.
Perfect. And of course, that actually comes from a photograph of a young powder monkey. Aspinwall Fuller was his name.
Oh, I don't think I've ever known his name.
Aspinwall Fuller.
Has to be in the
That's-
top 20 most
pretty
famous
sure
photos of
that's
the
who that
Civil
was.
War. Well, what
My
a great
coworkers
name,
always,
too.
always poke fun at me and say that I remind them of Aspinwall.
Well, here you got edged weapons and hand-carried
Yeah, a collection
weapons.
of small arms that sailors would have been familiar with. Of course, cutlasses. We have pikes. You know, Civil War is really one of the last wars that sailors go into battle armed with swords. An assortment of carbines, muskets, and pistols. Of course, the Colt revolver is very popular during the Civil War.
And here's something our people don't see a lot to the left, the USN cap pouch. I
Oh,
mean, we
yeah,
see a lot of
the
US. We don't
accoutrements
see a
for
lot
the-
of things
for
with
the
US
small
Navy
arms.
on them. So you're seeing a different side of the Civil War when you come here, and sometimes it's best to do that with the stuff. The
Right.
story isn't complete without the stuff.
We get that a lot. You know, it's one thing to see pictures or reading books, but to put the actual eyeballs on these artifacts really connects you to the history.
Great.
Pieces from the Georgia, of course, being an ironclad, and the Savannah River. And as Sherman marched on Savannah, the Georgia was scuttled. Many years later, a few years ago, these were brought up to clear the channel there at the Savannah River, taken to Texas A&M University for conservation, then off to the Naval Yard History and Heritage Command, and this is a shipment we got from them to display.
And this is great. I see you have some of the things that were found on the ship, some of the personal items. That really brings it home to see part of a shoe or, a basin or bottles, the
Right.
things the soldiers
And,
and sailors would have handled.
One I like to point out is, what do you do with a drunken sailor? Put him in shackles.
Yeah, there you go.
Put him in shackles.
And maybe that's not even enough. One of these iron smoothbore cannons. I
Right.
think
Yeah,
that's a
as far as we
smoothbore.
know, this is a one-off cannon that was made in Rome, Georgia.
Yeah. And sometimes these one-offs didn't go that well either.
Right,
They
yeah.
just didn't fit as well. And this thing you hear about the North being more industrial and the South being more agricultural is just as real as it gets.
Right.
And you see the South really improvising to figure everything
Right.
out. They're just not enough factory workers. There's not enough know-how in the South as it comes to that. So they did a lot. And Columbus was a major place for all of this.
Absolutely. Columbus was a major military-industrial complex during the Civil
Substantial
War.
indeed. Now, are we doubling back over there? Do we wanna go
Yeah.
by the?
Let's hit the.
Because this looks really cool to me. What do we have here?
Now, this exhibit represents the flagship of Admiral Farragut, Battle of Mobile Bay fame. The Hartford does not survive to this day, but we do have an artifact from the Hartford. This is the Admiral's cutter. This is what they would use to go ship to ship or ship to shore with.
Wow, super impressive. And this is original wood we're looking at?
Yeah, this is the original one here.
Wow. And therefore we have reason to think that Farragut would have been on this.
Quite possible, yeah.
And I'll tell you
Likely
what,
even.
those are some pretty thin boards over there,
Yeah.
for the seats. I mean, people in the Civil War were smaller than they are today. I think
Yeah,
on the
didn't have
exact height and size, if not age, of the Civil War soldier or sailor. Oh man, that's tempting. How do you walk by that and not ring that
Occasionally
bell?
I'll hear it ring out.
Maybe when you have school groups here? Okay, so now we're going into reproduction of the Hartford, is that right?
Yeah, this is a reproduction of the Hartford. This is where we really can explain to our guests how sailors lived, what their daily life was like, and what areas they operated in.
I think
on
it's
board a
interesting.
ship.
Yeah, I think it's interesting now compared to what we see from the Jackson and the other scuttled ships to be able to see what one looks like. I think you're trying to imply the integration of the U.S. Navy as well.
Yes.
On the ships, which went on a different timeline than the integration of the U.S. Army.
Certainly did.
Very cool. I loved seeing this display here because these actually appear in photographs sometimes right up at the near the
Yeah.
pilot house. You see this exact setup of the sort of sword storage container, I suppose. I'm not sure if there's an actual name for it. I'm sure Chris is judging me behind the camera for not knowing what that is. Ooh, what do we know?
Midship is the officers' quarters and the officers' mess, officers' berth. So this kind of shows you the difference, in the enlisted sailors, how they lived. And with increased responsibility, being an officer, you get a little more privilege. So
That
they
you
did
do.
have a table to eat on.
And sometimes these guys, though, officers at least of foot had to, buy a lot more of their own stuff, their uniforms.
true.
So they got a lot more money, but there were challenges. People talked about the difficulties of moving up sometimes too. But I'll tell you what, that looks pretty nice, and this looks even nicer.
Admiral Farragut's quarters, but more
Man.
than just his living area. This is really the nerve center of the fleet. This is where Admiral Farragut would consult his navigational charts, meet with his senior officers, and make the battle plans in this area right here.
Yeah, and that, sometimes we're talking about 20, 30, 40
Yeah,
ships
absolutely.
of different types, and here it is, like you said, the nerve center, and you're trying to do that through flags and communicate through the horns and whatnot. Fascinating stuff, totally different than on the battlefield in a lot of ways, but with similar challenges, distance,
Right.
noise, and smoke and otherwise.
Of course, we have a scale, 1-to-1 scale, pretty close anyway, replica of the Monitor's turret here. I think when people think about Civil War navies, if they've heard of anything, it's the battle between the Merrimack / Virginia.
Virginia, you were going to get
versus
called on
the
that if you didn't
Monitor.
fix
Absolutely.
that there.
And I get that question often. Now, is
Yeah.
it the Merrimack or is it the Virginia? Or
You
those
say
two
yes.
different
You say
ships?
yes.
Yes.
Good.
Both
I like,
true,
I
right?
like that you have the artillery damage in the side of the turret. Very cool. Now, just out of curiosity, is there anything inside there?
Inside there is actually air handler for this gallery.
Oh,
so
good
we've
move.
hidden part of the
Excellent.
air conditioner in there. But it's interesting you ask that because often we'll walk by and people can hear that air handler revving up and they'll say, oh, it even recreates the
cannon
the
is
sound.
moving.
Yeah,
That's
not
excellent.
quite,
I love
but-
it. Good, good. I love your models that you have here. So see, I know that when people are in the Civil War, there's the toy soldier people and the weapons people and the photographic people and maps people, and I know that there are model
got
people
stuff for
out
the
there.
model
So
people,
you're
too.
going to find
Yep.
something that you enjoy when
Absolutely.
you come here, whether it be the large scale model, the small scale model, or all the stuff that you have here. Great. All right, where are we off to now, man?
And this is Plymouth, North Carolina. This room recreates the Albemarle, which was one of the smaller but arguably more successful of the Confederate ironclads.
Okay, good, good. Now, I think I learned a little secret while we were walking around. This is reproduction, but not entirely.
No, sir. The anchor comes off the Chattahoochee that we have on the other side of the museum. And the first strip of armor on either side of the doorway for our guests, that's an actual piece of armor from the Jackson.
Okay, well, we're going to test that while we walk by it. But
Absolutely.
I like the immersive nature of what you're doing here. You've got sort of I don't know what that structure is called, but there's always one of those next to the harbor taking, freight off and whatnot. and
This is
loading it
probably one of our most photographed exhibits here. People like to stand here
Let me take your
and
advice.
put
then.
themselves
Yeah,
right.
yeah, there we go. Like they're right here.
Yeah, like
I'll
they're
have
right
to
here.
do that a
in our
little
immersive
later
exhibit.
too. Very cool. Okay, and then we get to walk in. Am I correct?
Yes, sir. We can actually walk inside.
Now, is this a historic feature? I see that we've got sort of portholes that can be covered to protect the men and the cannons.
Yes. So this actually had two guns, one fore, one aft, and they were on 180-degree pivoting carriages. So you could actually pivot the gun to fire out of one of three portals on the front.
Very cool. Now, Chris, when we walk in here, let's. I guess I'll put my mic right next to it. But look, you can listen to the real one, and here's the reproduction. So these two are actually original
actual
to the
plates from
Civil
the
War.
Jackson, yeah.
Very, very cool. Ooh, yeah, and you can really see.
Yeah, and I like to point out too that the floor is for our guests. The actual floor would have been closer to here, so you can imagine 15 to 20 sailors cramped around this area. You've got a smokestack, you've got a vent going down to the engine deck. How hot, how cramped it would be in this area.
And is there any way you could try to even imagine what that sound
The
would have been like
sound,
when a
wow,
big
yeah.
gun like that, with 100 pounds of powder or something like that is going off? I probably messed that estimate up as well. But
Yeah,
just
you're
a
probably talking
massive
12, 15 pounds of powder, but you're pushing a 100-pound cannonball.
I was 1/8 there. That's okay. Like I said, I'm more of a ground-based guy.
And these are what those cannons will be shooting. These are, of course, reproductions, but these are cannon bolts here.
Okay, good, good. And these things could disable enemy guns. They could sink enemy ships if they could hit right
That's
below
the
at
idea.
right
They're
spot.
solid, they're flat on the end to deliver as much energy you can to punch holes in that
Interesting.
energy.
And they could
enemy
hit
armor.
the pilot house. They could hit the rudder.
Right.
All those things could help to disable and render, unusable this ship. And are we wrapping it up right over here? Is that what we do? What do we have here? This has to attract some attention.
Let me cut the light on. Yeah, so this here is a working exhibit. This shows artifact conservation, electrolytic conversion, electrolysis tank is what this is. So it's a way to pull the rust and break the bonds of the rust of the artifacts. Problems with iron artifacts, of course, is rust, but when you have a very fragile artifact, it's a challenge to get that rust off without damaging the artifact, and electrolytic conversion is the way we do that.
Okay, and this looks like a pretty painstaking process. You're doing it one or two objects at a time, and it takes weeks, months, years?
Yeah, we're into months and years. We do keep this turd down very low, so it is a working exhibit, but allows us to show our guests, some of the things we do to preserve these artifacts.
That's super cool. Now, we have more to shoot on a separate video, but Brendan, is there anything else you want to tell us about this place or about anything in it?
We certainly are all passionate about what we do here, and we invite people to come and we'd love to share these stories with you.
Well, let me, in my most animated fashion, agree with that. This place is super cool. I've been wanting to come for a long time. It's on the Civil War 150 list, and I'm just really excited that we were able to come today. Thanks so much for having us.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thanks to Chris White behind the camera. Thanks to all your colleagues, and thank you all for supporting battlefield preservation and education.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. To stay up to date on all the latest and coolest videos, please subscribe to the Trust YouTube channel. Preserve, educate, inspire.